And that's oftentimes, the crux of a program is whether or not you can provide that data and how easily accessible it is.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Folks, we're back for another show for Simply Trade podcast, and I am really excited about so far in 2024. Lala, we have been having some fantastic groups of people on our guest list, and it is really skyrocketing our show in many aspects. I got to say, kudos to you and some of our team there as we're reaching out to different ones and booking these people and getting them scheduled to do the shows. But I will say today we're going to have a great show as well. But again, so far, as far as 2024, I think we're hitting it out of the park compared to what we did last year.
Oh, we definitely are. We more than tripled our followers, and actually, I guess it depends. Apple kind of blocked a lot of for marketing people. It's just a nightmare right now because anything having to do with Apple, you really can't see a lot of the stuff that you used to see. But I mean, whatever it is that we can see, it looks like we're doing quite well. And so this time last year, we're about triple our subscribers and followers and listeners, what they call active listeners. So anyway, but yeah, and we do have a full show today, and sorry if I'm cutting the chit chat short, but we do have a full show, and I know this is the first time we've had quite a few. We have 4 people on the show, all from Flexport, which Andy, I wanted to show you. I was catching up with my reading this weekend. Look what I have here.
Oh yes, I saw that at one of the conferences. That's like. Tell our listeners the title there. What you just showed.
Yeah, it's called The Little Big Ship and the Little Digger, and it's a story that Ryan Peterson, who's the CEO of and founder or co-founder of Flexport, and so it's a cute little story. But it's funny that I say that I really wasn't reading. I had already read it before, but anyway. But it's funny that this story actually kind of relates to almost some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Suez Canal. The stories about the Suez Canal. Remember that ship that got stuck there in the Suez Canal in 2021, I think, somewhere around there. So that's what the story is about: digging that ship out of and making the ship go back, get back out to sea. But so now, a little further south from there is the Red Sea and all the issues that we're having right now. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a good segue or not into what we're going to be into our guests. But Andy, I don't know if you want to introduce all of them, and then we'll start our conversation because we do have a lot of topics to talk about.
Yeah, we'll start out as first off, a good friend had been. We've known each other for many years, Tom Gould, and we've tackled some regulatory affairs issues together and debated issues together and whatnot. And then Bernie, you have been around in the industry a long time. You and I have probably not talked, but for the last couple of years here. So it's like a pleasure getting to have you back on our show as well. Now, all right, Tim Vorderstrass with Flexport, and I understand you're focused on the duty drawback area. And then Jen Park, you are in the classification side and consulting side of things, and classification. I'm going to be wanting to know more of probably looking at strategies and intent for certain classifications that you want to try and do. And even I have to assume this, but I'm sure you have an expertise in trying to draft up letters to get rulings on certain things and along that line. So, folks, welcome to our show. I got to tell you, this is Flexport is a great company. It's very impressive what you all have had to do. But Tom, let me start with you real quick. Is that How are things going from your perspective on that? And then Bernie, we'll go to you on next on that one. It's just like, what are you seeing, and what are the hot buttons, I guess, for Flexport?
So, well, Flexport's doing great. We're, I think one of the main things that we're seeing is just a lot more interest in us, interest in the company, because of the fact that we're kind of a tech forward company, and we really are looking to apply technology to the industry that we've all been involved with for many, many years, that we know is really behind the times in many ways, technologically.
Mm-hmm. Well, fantastic. Bernie, how about you from your perspective?
Yeah. So we have been in the market a lot, especially Ryan has been on a bunch of different programs, talking a lot about what's going on in the Red Sea and some issues with just supply chain in general. But from an overall business perspective, we're really geared up for this RFP season. So there's a lot of freight RFPs that are coming out. This is the kind of the prime time between now and usually around the April-May timeframe, when companies are selecting their new providers or existing providers, extending with them. So we're really seeing a huge influx on the RFP side of the house, and then working with these clients, making sure that they understand the overall value proposition. What that really comes down to, you guys know this as well. When you think about international trade, it's a closed loop process. It starts with the PO, ends with final mile delivery. It's inventory in motion. Everybody's looking for visibility at the part and SKU level. So that's really the areas that we tend to focus on. So that side of it has been going extremely, extremely well.
And that there's no doubt, Tom mentioned about the technological things on that. When you're looking at that SKU level and part level and all, it's you got to use automation. You've got to use, systems as well as automation within those systems to keep it updated and utilize that for retrieval as far as taking advantage of some things. Speaking of which, then that kind of goes back, Tim, with the duty drawback scenario. I kind of look at duty drawbacks as one of these where you have a goldsmith that is used to manufacturing jewelry and different things, and as they're doing that and refining it and whatnot, there's a lot of things that a lot of times when they're cleaning up their shop, they sweep up, the stuff off the floor and whatnot. And you think a lot of times they're going to just throw it off and throw it in the trash. No, not in that area and not in that environment. They wind up putting it into the fire, and whatever chaff or something, it'll burn away. But then there's still some valuable gold that comes up, and they're able to get that. So from a duty drawback, I kind of see that as a scenario where there's a lot of folks that are, they're importing, they're exporting, they're selling here and there and whatnot. And due to inflation, due to, tariffs going up and down and doing the different things, I would think that the duty drawback area is one that people are starting to look at and say, are we leaving money on the table? Would that be a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the 301 tariffs, especially, there's some commodities, complete categories of products that never had tariffs, right? Or very minimal. And now they're paying, millions or tens of millions, and sometimes in some cases a whole heck of a lot more, right? In tariffs. And, I think one of the great things about drawback is exactly what you mentioned, right? You have these imports, and then you fulfill all these orders, and you're exporting these things out, and that could be the end of the story. But really, you can actually leverage those documents, leverage that data, and turn around some pretty significant refunds that could really come back to help you be profitable, and then in turn also be more competitive.
Well, to our listeners, and Tim, to what you're saying, to our listeners, if you are obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of companies that are importing a lot of product from your factories, whatever. But if you are selling any of that or exporting any of that to other, internal companies or selling it to other companies around the world, you have a very strong case to, let me put it this way, maybe a strong incentive to consider looking at the duty drawback capabilities. So folks like, Tim and the Flexport folks, and there's others out there obviously, but to check that out, because that's money, any money that you get back would be going straight to the bottom line. That said, with the information we just talked about, what Bernie was saying is keeping up at the part number and SKU level. you got to track that stuff from the factory all the way in and then back out. And the only way to do that is with some good systems, good software that's going to be able to extract it and manage that. But one of the other things that's fundamental, I guess, also is coming back to, are the products classified right? Or is there something that maybe you've classified it traditionally on, a classification 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. And it's like, things that may have changed or whatever. Jen, are there any classifications that have significantly changed for commodities in 2024?
I would say it's not too exciting. There weren't too many. There were some fruit, vegetables, and chemicals. I would say, like, for example, not to bore you, like tomatoes. They were now grouped into whether it's a grape tomato, a round tomato, or Roma, so they did kind of make specific subheadings for it, but there weren't too many products that were impacted by the 2024 changes this year.
So it's not too sexy, huh?
No, not really.
So
but Jen,
go ahead.
I was going to say, but Jen, on the other area that you cover, and then what Tim also was talking about, putting those two together, Tim is talking about drawbacks, and then your other area that you cover is consulting. Traditionally, Flexport has been known for like a freight forwarder, for example, and to Tom's comment, you're more data forward, more technology driven, everything. I guess it's a trade secret, a little secret that some companies might know that I mean, what do y'all do? I mean, you said consulting, so it's be above and beyond just freight forwarding and logistics, right? I mean, and I would assume that because Tim is talking about drawbacks, you guys would also do the drawbacks for companies, or is it just because of the data, et cetera? I guess just kind of trying to understand that fully.
Yeah. So when we're talking about consulting, one of the reasons why I actually came to Flexport. In the past life, I worked at a law firm. I worked at the Big Four, really focused on consulting. But one of the reasons why I joined Flexport is that I saw a gap in terms of when importers were understanding their data or their historical entries. There was a very big disconnect between the importer and the broker. So, as a compliance professional, when I'm working with a client or a company, and I'm asking, can I get your entry data? Can I get your product data? A lot of companies aren't organized where they have all their products in a very clean database, or they have all their entry files readily available for them to review. So when we wanted that data, it was very hard to get entry packets, very hard to get product information. So when I was working with Flexport on the other side, on the client side, Flexport had all the data readily available. And I said, this is a great opportunity for consulting to come in. The data is already there. The client, you already have access to the client. So being able to work with the client and the brokerage and the freight all in one piece just made consulting a lot more easier and more sense. And I kind of thought that was like the future of consulting, especially in this area. So when we talk about data, it's very powerful whenever we have clients that come to us, whether it's looking for duty saving strategies or whether they want to do compliance. I just work directly with our Flexport team saying, hey, can you send me the entry packets? Can you send me their product list from the product library that we have? And I'm able to readily get it. And that saves significant amount of time on the consulting side. So I would say data is powerful. And we are data driven in terms of the way we consult. And it makes a lot of things easier for my team as we advise clients on how they can, save duty or how they can comply, because we're able to identify all that readily before we have conversations with them through the data that we already have.
Folks, let me stop for a second. And as we're, Jen's saying this and what we're talking about, the most effective, as far as this is a personal comment for me, I guess, the most effective compliance people I've seen in the industry have also been the most automated. Now, when I say that, it is, again, in my opinion, the better you manage your data, the more effective you'll be from a compliance standpoint. And when I say that, is managing your data is literally working in a collaborative effort with your purchasing, with your IT, with your accounting, both accounts payable, accounts receivable, as far as your, of course, legal on certain things of that nature, but your logistics and transportation and your compliance and all that. You don't need to be enemies with these folks or competition. It's like you can really help each other out considerably. Customer service is another one. And as you're looking at that and these sales and things are going on, and the customer service folks are looking at it with these orders, and they're having to answer or respond to certain clients. Well, if there's an exception, case in point, what I just said, exceptions throughout all of us, accounting, whatever, but customer service is a good one. You can reverse engineer it, if I can talk all of a sudden. And then we get in there, and what I'm getting at is there's a breakdown in information. Information is, as Fred Smith said, from the founder of FedEx, he said, the information about your shipment a lot of times is so much more important than the shipment itself, because there's so many things that go on with it. You still need the shipment, but the schedules, the exceptions, the problems, what I got to do? Do I need to react to it? Do I need to do something administratively? Have I crossed the T's and dotted the I's? Is there money on the table? Whatever. All that comes back from what? The data and manage it. So to that extent, there's a lot that goes on. Why don't we shift gears here a little bit, though, is that the hot button right now is what's going on in the Middle East. You've got the Houthis that are sending missiles and drones and whatnot against cargo ships and other commercial ships out there and whatnot, tankers and whatnot. Who wants to hit it? Bernie, do you want to hit that as far as what is it that's going on? Because, we talk about it, we hear this. I look at that, what do they call it? The strait there, in the Red Sea yeah, thank you. My memory is as long as a turtle's tail, so I don't have my notes in front of me on this one. The Strait of Hormuz is kind of like the same deal as the Panama Canal is in South or in Central America. You're able to cut through geographically and do a lot of things. Well, that Red Sea and that situation right now, we're hearing all kinds of problems, and so we hear where a lot of container ship companies are going, you know what, we're not going through there anymore. Well, what does that mean to us? And what are you doing?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head. I mean, what we're seeing in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, just in general, is obviously it's part of the Middle East ongoing conflict with the Houthis and, what's going on from an overall area perspective, if you will. But it has dramatically impacted supply chains as far as time to market. Now if you have to go around the Cape of Good Hope, it's adding extreme amounts of days and timing associated with that. And all of these ships that are set up, they're anticipating a specific schedule as to when they're going to get to destination, then pick up the next set of cargo and go on. But now when you're elongating that process and you start missing those dates, you're going to have blank sailings. You're going to have a lot of issues that has this ripple effect from a supply chain perspective. So when you think about this, the groups that are really, really affected is obviously anybody that wanted to transit that specific area. Because one of the things you're going to get hit with, even if you want to go through and exercise the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea and to ship through there, is you're going to probably definitely get hit with significantly higher cargo insurance to transit those areas. So everybody is experiencing that in addition to the lead time. So what you see is your high value shipments, those shipments where the cash to cash cycle is most important. Those are the ones that are really heavily impacted on this. And you're seeing the rates, pretty much double from an overall shipping perspective. In addition to, all of this, it's basically making sure that businesses really understand what their options are. If they do decide to take a different route, what is the overall ETD or ETA for this as to estimated time of arrival, taking these new routes? And what does that do from a supply chain perspective? Because you guys know, better than anyone really here, is if you have raw goods that are coming in that are going into a manufacturing process, you usually have X amount of inventory that's on hand for you to keep those assembly lines up and running. So that's that ripple effect of not being able to get that product in and be able to execute against it. Because if you think about it, the most expensive component of any supply chain is inventory. Now, inventory is going to be on the water. It's going to be tied up longer. And then that has that ripple effect through their entire business. So I think that's what the economy is bracing for here. And I think that's what a lot of these shippers are having to deal with is, this added complexity and quite frankly, safety associated with it.
Do you guys have any, summarized listing of maybe some of the top commodities that are being affected by this situation?
Yeah, so I'll go with region here too. If you take, like, for example, China, China has about 95% of its exports that are all going by water. So what you want to do is look at it at a country level, and then you want to look at it at a specific commodity level. But any of those commodities that are high value are the ones that are really getting scrutinized now of, what can we do? And a lot of them are resorting to air. Taking the extra hit from a freight perspective and having to go that route because they don't have any other options.
Well, with that though, it's like when you're saying, so a lot of ocean shipments coming out of China, but that would be affected by this would be the ones being destination would be Europe, not necessarily U.S. because U.S. they're going to hit the West Coast. So you're talking about coming around, the southern part of India and going up through the Red Sea, and then being able to deliver to Europe. And instead, they're having to go all the way around the Cape. Or look at, the old Silk Road development and trying to do some of the rails. And as far as what I'm looking at, there's still the challenge of some of the Middle Eastern countries that are not necessarily open to transiting shipments.
Correct. Yep. So all of that comes into play. And again, you're just like we've been talking about earlier, what everybody is looking for is visibility. Where is my stuff? And then what can I actually do to affect my transit time associated with it, especially if the boat's already on the water?
All right. So with that, let me ask this question and I'll throw it open to whoever wants to make comment on it. But all right. So with one particular situation, obviously it's causing wailing and gnashing of teeth of the added, there's probably an additional 4,000 miles being added when you having to go around the Cape of Africa. With that, are there maybe some trade-offs? Case in point, the frequency of ports, let's say in Namibia, just north of South Africa in Walvis Bay, or in the Jonestown areas and in those ports. With ships going around the Cape, would there be an additional frequency in and out of South African type ports? We're looking at that. Would that be a positive for them?
I think a positive. Sorry, and anybody else want to go? Do you want?
No, good. Well, I was going to say that we're not seeing it that much, and one of the issues that's there's not only the transit issues, but the infrastructure in Africa is really just not as good as it is in other parts of the world. So some of the really large container vessels that are coming out of China really don't have the ability to stop in some of these ports in South Africa because they simply don't have the infrastructure, and then they also don't have the product. As much, right? They're not dropping off product. They're not picking up product because not as much stuff is being made. One of the other conversations that we have on the customs side is AGOA, and that's the African free trade agreement, where companies are able to import duty free from sub-Saharan African countries, and that's up for renewal in 2025. And so companies are not investing in Africa right now because there's not a certainty that that's going to be around for much longer. So there's a lot of different political issues that come into play. Shipping is one of them. But I think that having the vessels going around the Cape and knowing that there may be, that we don't know how long the issue is going to be with the Suez Canal, is that maybe there is opportunities there for some smart people to come up with new ideas and new ways of handling freight and new ways of manufacturing.
Well, I know that from a personal standpoint, I have clients that are I'm working with that are importing and exporting to and from South Africa as well as Namibia and in those areas. And with that, they're especially South Africa. Namibia is a great port to go in and out of. Quite frankly, I'm surprised people aren't using it more. But you just mentioned some of it has to do with the infrastructure. But I will also say that there's congestion in the ports in South Africa because there's just not enough frequencies. And so what's happening is like trying to get things in and out of there with the containers and whatnot. And I'm like, hey, this ought to be a great opportunity. South Africa does have a lot of great products. Now, do they have all the products you're talking about to replace things? No. So one of my other questions is going to be, with the commodities that are getting caught up in this Suez Canal scenario and all that, is there a situation where maybe people should be looking at other sources? And where would that be? Would it be in South America, Central America type things? Would it be out of Europe, for example, and all that? I mean, do you guys see any of that kind of stuff that comes into play that might be an opportunity here?
I was just going to say, hit the nail on the head. Source of supply is kind of the number one topic that's out there today. I can't tell you. I mean, Jen, I'm sure can talk to this as well, but she'll get a product list from companies and say, okay, this is where I'm manufacturing from today. But what if I changed to Egypt? What if I changed to these locations? What does that mean? Because then you're looking at the net landed cost. Of course, there's the freight issue, but it's, the unit price associated with it. Classification becomes key, determines your duty rate, but also admissibility out of a country into a country. What do you have to do for additional government agency filings, that kind of thing. So I don't know, Jen, if you want to just talk to kind of what you're seeing from clients and kind of what they're asking you for recently.
Yeah, I mean, we do get a lot of requests, and I think not only for the Suez Canal situation, but just because of China's Section 301 tariffs, like a lot of the requests that we get from the consulting side is if we were to change now our sourcing from, China to another non-China country, and they will give us like a potential list. Like if we were to switch, could you give us the duty rates, and then what we'll do is let them know what the duty rates would now be, and if there's any other information that they would need to consider sourcing from those countries. And so they kind of take it upon themselves, kind of doing the business assessment of whether they want to kind of move forward with it. I know it's not an easy switch for companies, right? Moving your supply chain, your sourcing is a big lift, but it is this due diligence that they're doing to kind of now look into other areas of sourcing that's outside of China.
Well, Jen, let me jump in on that one. Is that, to your point, when people are looking at this is one of those where too often I think there were people who say, what's the duty rate here and there and whatever? And you start looking at it and they're almost so isolated with just the duty rate. I would have to say, you need to look at things holistically, because one of the other things could be that your transit time and your transportation expense may be a lot less from a different country versus, all the way from China or somewhere else. So once you look at things in a complete holistic scenario there, then, the other is inland transportation. You hit the West Coast, let's say from China, but you've got distribution centers that are in the center or on the eastern seaboard. Well, now you got transit all the way across. It's like that comes into play. So when I'm saying holistically, I mean, you take it lock, stock, and barrel, the whole scenario. That's one of those things that I think a lot of companies may be a bit too isolated in when they're asking, well, if we change sources, what about this? Do you ever come back and say, look, yeah, we can give you an answer on this, but let's look at it holistically and come back with a final answer with that kind of scenario with a company?
Yeah, so our team doesn't focus on the holistic approach. We do recommend that. The duty rate is one probably data point that they should be looking at out of multiple. So what we will advise on usually is not only the duty rates, if there's any free trade agreements that are applicable to their products. And sometimes even if they do shift their origin sourcing, now it could be subject to anti-dumping. So there are multiple components that they need to consider from customs import side. But we do recommend that they look at it from the transit time as well. So working with our freight team to understand what would the cost be so that they understand the complete landed cost. I think those are multiple components that they need to consider. But I think our team really focuses on just the customs and the import aspect of it.
Hey, Andy, let me add to what Jen was saying is that, from one of the things that we've been seeing over the past a number of years that Jen, I think, alluded to was the fact that companies were looking a lot at the Section 301 tariffs out of China. And so a lot of companies were moving their product from China to other Southeast Asian countries to avoid that. And now with the Suez Canal issue, they're going back and reevaluating. One of the things that was being looked at was, should we move to Southeast Asia or should we move closer to home here in the U.S., maybe like Central America, Mexico, and so forth? regional, and that also brings in another criteria to look at, and that is the free trade agreements, right? So if you have, you might be able to produce something in Southeast Asia and pay not pay the Section 301 duty, but you're going to pay the regular duty. But maybe you can move the production to, say, Mexico and avoid the regular duty. But then you also have the issue of the Suez Canal, and we really haven't touched on Panama Canal. But Panama Canal is also having issues where they're slowing down there. The drought, the environmental issues there. They're not able to transmit as many vessels through the Panama Canal. So there's a lot of things that companies are looking at. And I would say a lot of things that customs is looking at. When I say customs, I'm talking about all the various different customs administrations around the world, because in our history in working with trade, we always looked at where the product was finally produced and how it got to the destination where it needed to go to. Well, customs and companies now are looking a lot further back and forward in their supply chains with issues like forced labor. We need to look at where the raw materials were sourced, and we need to track that all the way forward. And we're also looking forward. You have, environmental issues, like, for example, how are products disposed of at the end of their life cycle? And so then we also have another, component that we're going to talk about as drawback, is if you do have products that are being moved into a country and moved out of the country. So there's a lot of things that companies are looking at today. And again, that goes back to when we started talking about why Jen mentioned why she came to Flexport, why I came to Flexport, is the data. It's that companies, to make these decisions, need to have access to the information.
Mm-hmm. Well, to manage your supply chain holistically, again, looking at that, I highly, highly recommend for our listeners, get involved and do a collaborative team building with your purchasing, with your IT, with your customer service and accounting, all these different areas as you're looking at it. Because if you really, truly, if you are the COO and CFO of a company, and you're looking to try and obviously cut corners, and I say cut corners from a standpoint, reduce costs, improve your margins, all that, it comes down to managing your data. And one of the biggest things would be, where are the exceptions? Too much time on the ground, not getting cleared, or, customer orders that seem to disappear, or customers not paying their bill. Why? Whatever. And it could be coming down to, I've done several seminars with multiple issues like that, and it is amazing on how fast we can streamline things. I'll give you an example, was from a billing perspective, and this is accounts receivable. Customers were not paying their bill because they, in turn, when the order was done, could not figure out what department the end client's department should be charged. So it comes through. Guess what? It was on the initial order, and it didn't get passed through the selling company. And it's like, well, if you put that on as a reference in the, on the bill of lading even, or on this or that, as it goes through, now all of a sudden it's a smooth thing and nobody has to look it up. So, little things like that could go a long way. It sounds like you guys are on top of that kind of thing to help people look, especially, Tim, from your perspective. I guess the duty drawback scenario and the opportunities, whether it's a valid opportunity or not, you can assess it, but it comes down to looking at the information and being able to extract that out. And there may be opportunities where they're selling abroad, but if they don't manage their data, I guess that compromises the ability to do a drawback, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's, that's what most claimants or potential claimants or companies who want to claim drawback spend their time doing. They're trying to get this data that was not structured and not intended to be structured in a way that could be leveraged for refunds. Similarly, I think on, proof of exports or export data itself, right, is, that's sales right now, being sales information that's being used for an unintended purpose. I think one of the great things about drawback, and also a challenge, especially up front, is, I can go back 5 years, but then you look at, the documentation retention policies that you have, whether a lot of companies have been changing ERP systems, right? That seems to be something I hear almost every week from clients is, companies change ERP systems. Now, how do we get access to the right information, the right data? And then going back to the import side, right? There's a lot of visibility that you can gain from, having that information structured, understanding where your ships are, where your products are and what ship, where it is, being delayed or not delayed, when it comes in, and then, ultimately when it's cleared. Now, all that data from the entry should be able to flow back to, the commercial invoice, the packing list level details. And that's oftentimes, the crux of a program is whether or not you can provide that data and how easily accessible it is.
And Tim, Andy had commented just recently, just right now, about like the CFO and other C levels that are looking at their bottom line. But Tim, have you seen that as a result of the pandemic, or have you seen that those drawbacks have gone up, or the request, the desire to do drawbacks has gone up? Because we do a training here for drawbacks, and we don't do the actual drawback. We just train people on what drawback is, et cetera, et cetera. But what we saw, like, for example, during the pandemic, is we saw several companies that would attend, and they actually justified their business staying open because of drawbacks. Because there was nothing moving, that things were not selling and they were not shipping, and et cetera. And they at least kept the skeleton crew around because of the drawbacks that they were getting. I know at least a couple of our customers that were well in the millions of drawback refunds. Has that trend continued, or?
I would say it was shocking, especially early on in the pandemic. I think a couple of things happened, right? It forced companies to really explore e-commerce. And when they started exploring e-commerce, they started opening up borders, like not just like from a retail location, but like across countries, right? So that opened up more opportunities, especially in the e-commerce space with the consumer products, apparel. It opened up a lot of opportunities, but then there were those challenges. So traditionally, when the main points of contact that, a drawback provider would work with are, trade compliance people, the people who do the hard work in the trenches. During the last couple of years, I've seen a number of clients. I had a call today where the CEO is the main point of contact. Their COO is very heavily involved, and the CFO is extremely invested. I've had companies, the CEO and the CFO reach out to me and say, you saved this drawback saves our company. And it's great, from our perspective, it's great to hear that, but it's also in a very real way, very disheartening, because drawback is not supposed to save a company. It is supposed to help the company better compete in foreign markets and be profitable. But yeah, I've seen that as a big thing. It's really elevated and become much more visible across the company. Similarly, I think there's been a huge shift with the increase of the Section 321s, the de minimis. Huge shift in supply chains, moving cross borders, moving their inventory cross border, and then fulfilling from either Canada or Mexico. And we've seen that on the rise as well, and that presents significant drawback opportunity as well, cost savings, and driving up imports and exports.
Okay, well, let me ask this: is that as we're we need to kind of wrap some things up here, but as we're looking at this, some of the things that I'm kind of hearing based on our comments today, I mean, we've talked about several things, but as far as looking at dealing with the 4,000 mile additional things around the Cape or whatever, 4,000 or 5,000 miles, whatever it is, in a short-term run, it sounds like some folks are looking at air cargo and are moving things air freight to try and supplement the shortfall of some of the inventory until those ships and that normal supply chain can start catching up and start delivering. That's one thing. The second thing I've heard is looking at changing sourcing and maybe looking at it regionally for multiple reasons, not only the Suez Canal and the Red Sea and all, but also the the geopolitical tensions between U.S. and China. I mean, we have the scenario too where we didn't mention it, but there's the China-Taiwan situation, and Taiwan is very vulnerable, and China is apt to say, within 12 months, they are looking at taking that back, if you will. Well, if that happens, that's another supply chain disruption that's a major one that will happen for a while until the dust settles on whatever happens of that. And so that's another scenario that people need to be planning for. So changing sourcing and finding those sourcing is where coming into play. Do y'all do that to help people find actual other sources for, certain commodities and manufacturers around the world for customers?
So I'll say that one of the things that we do with companies to help with this is analyzing data, right? So going back to looking at the ACE data and other data that's available around the world. So a lot of that information is available. It's just very difficult, and not a lot of people really understand how to look at it. So what we will sometimes do is take a look at a company's data and look at things like their HTS classifications and their country of origin for those products. And then we'll look at publicly available data and compare that, and we'll be able to share with them what other companies are sourcing products that are similar to theirs, what locations they're sourcing from, so that companies are not going with a blank slate of saying, okay, I need to move out of China. Where do I go? They can at least say other companies that are selling similar products are sourcing those similar products from these countries or these regions. So again, it goes back to the data question that we started talking about.
Well, that's the scenario there is managing your data. That's where I was going next, is like you've got to really do a hard assessment, and how strong or how weak are you in some of those things. And I'm sure that's another thing that you would be able to help them with and walk them through the process and look at. Because I'll tell you what, one of the things that I usually test or suggest to companies to test their systems. Give me the top 10 commodities that you've imported 5 years ago. I want to see the entry data. I want to see the country of origin, the classification, how much duty and taxes did you pay, get it down to the SKU level and the part number level and those kinds of things. And a lot of them will go the deer in the headlight loop. Oh yeah, we've got, our data is archived. Okay, well, show it to me 5 years ago. All right, let's just do 4 years ago. Give me from January to March in 4 years ago, and look at it from that perspective. Y'all are getting grins on your face because I guarantee you, your clients are probably going, "Oh, it's an aha moment." It's like, "Oh crap," whatever. So,
well, I think we were talking a little bit about ACE and the tool that Customs in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection has, which provides companies with reports. And what companies can do is they can download their data and they can go back 5 years and see what they had 5 years ago. The challenge that most companies have today is not necessarily getting the data, because it's fairly easy to sign up for an account. But then you get this dump of a lot of data that's not really formatted, and what do you do with it? And that's one of the things that we help with a lot of our clients is we have a tool that we're able to pull in their data and provide them with not their data back regurgitated right back to them, but we provide it in a way that they can start to make meaningful decisions, right? We're able to provide them with charts and graphs and give them the ability to manipulate that. Like you said, if you said you wanted to look at 5 years ago, okay, well then it's simple to plug in 2019 and see what it was. That's not as easy to do natively with ACE, but once you've pulled the data down and run it through a process like what we do with our clients are much more able to pull that type of information out because of the tools that we've built that allows our clients to manipulate that data.
Well, and this is where I guess I would, for our listeners, folks, can you stop and think for a second? Now, you may be a frontline compliance person. You may be in the middle management. You may be in the logistics, transportation, warehouse. Doesn't matter, in different facets, even on the accounting side or whatever. Can you imagine if you had the tools that Tom was just talking about here in that data and being able to look at it and extract out from different perspectives and go to your upper management and put together the reports to say, just as a point of information. Here's the trend of imported products from us and the sale thereof, and overlay it with that. Here's what we've exported, or here's what we've paid in duties and taxes, whatever the case may be. What has been, you can even look at it from a standpoint to say, here's what we've imported, here's the transit things, and by the way, here's some shipping data that here are the exceptions, and a number of exceptions that we wound up having to deal with. How many of them were delivered on time versus those that weren't? Well, here are the top carriers that we were dealing with, and those that gave us the biggest problems, or the manufacturers that gave us the biggest problems from an accounting perspective. All that kind of, whatever it is that you're looking at. That kind of data, when you're looking at it, is the big, it's in a great big pot, but then you start looking at it and extracting out what you need. And then you can make your assessment. Hey, we're in great shape. Look at this. And I have the numbers to show it. You would look like a hero to your C-suite or your upper management if you're walking in with that kind of information, because it is so empowering for them to look at it. And what's the result? Strategic planning, strategic decisions can be made that would springboard you way ahead of the competition. Tom, is that a good assessment of what we're talking about here?
Absolutely. And one of my our favorite things to do is when we share our tool with the client, with our client's ACE data, we make them the hero, right? We give them the ability to go to and to sit in the room with the C-suite and be able to answer questions on the fly, because not only do they have the data in front of them, but they have the tools that allow them to pull the relevant data out, and they have the tools that tell them in many cases what is the relevant data that they should be looking at.
Yeah, there's the one area. I mean, when you're dealing with ACE data, it's great because it gives you a ton of information. Not the best formatted, but you can work with it when you bring it in. But it's all at the HTS level. What you really need to get into for Tim to really grind his teeth on that, he needs the part level and SKU level information. Really get to that level. If you've got a product library, if you've ingested the commercial invoice and you have all of that data, then you pull it in from ACE, you match it with this other data at the part and SKU level, and it makes it 10 times more valuable for the business. Because now you can sit down and say, here's my effective duty rate for this specific trade lane, for this specific commodity for the last 5 years.
Well, and it's so, from an upper management perspective, I can remember when my staff would come in and they would share with me some of the things. And if they were presenting that kind of stuff, I'm telling you what, I'm ready strutting around like a peacock in a barnyard, because there's like, look at what they have done. And they are so fantastic, and they're showing that stuff off. And it's like, and then you get like as frisky as a puppy on a new, first snow out in the yard. They're jumping around going, hey, this is cool. This is fun. We can have a lot of fun doing this kind of stuff. Folks, this is one of those where if you manage your data, you're going to be able to do a lot of things. But if you can't manage it, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's a key element there. There's another aspect aside from just doing strategic. You need to be able to manage what your supply chain's doing and be able to then adapt to the situations. I guess that's a lot of other things that come into play when there are supply chain disruptions. You can really measure what the true impact is, how much you need to do, and say, rather than say, well, we're going to ship everything air cargo instead of ocean. Well, you can't do that. It'd be astronomically expensive, but you may need to do, here's how much I need to move to fill the gap until that ship gets around and fills the void. And all that. That gives you the power from that data to know what to do. What would be the best thing to go ahead and empower you right off the bat, rather than an introductory type thing and going back and forth? What do they need to bring to you to make it an effective conversation?
I really appreciate when they know what their end goal is or their objective is. If they just come to me saying, I have a question without an objective in mind, that makes the conversation a little bit harder. But from my perspective, when we get a question, we do try to look at it holistically. So we do try to assess, why are they asking this? What are some of the implications? How can we help them besides just answering this question? So getting an objective is key, because we can tackle it from various different ways, as opposed to just answering that one question directly and then they just go away. We want to make sure that we're not just answering one question, but, continuing to work with them to give them the information that they need. And I think one of the Flexport values is empowering our clients, right? We just want to make sure that all the answers that we give, the data that we give, empowers our clients to move forward with that, to make their own strategic decisions in their supply chain.
Yeah, I think the end goal is pretty clear when it comes to drawback, right? You want to get some money back. So when it comes to things that you want to look at, obviously your imports, you want to look at your exports, right? Those are the two things, but also, your any disposition, destruction. Do you have recalls? Do you have warranty returns that you're destroying? Like anytime something is coming out of your inventory, either for exportation, whether it's sold, whether it's just an inventory transfer, there's a drawback opportunity. I think the other thing to think about is look beyond your own activity. Are you purchasing? Is your purchasing team supplying any of the merchandise from domestic sources? Do you have any domestic vendors? In all likelihood, they probably imported it or imported the raw materials. Maybe if they've done some manufacturing. On the outbound side, who are your customers? Are your customers turning around and exporting? With their cooperation, you could potentially save some money there as well. So look end to end and look beyond just the information that you have in front of you. Look at what's coming into your inventory. Where are you getting it? Where is it possibly being sourced? And then look at what's coming out of your inventory, whether it's being exported, destroyed, who are you selling to, and where it might be going.
All right, Bernie, from your perspective, any thoughts on final thoughts for people here based on what we've talked about?
Yeah. So I've loved the discussion, Andy, about the holistic view, the end-to-end view, because again, you're talking about supply chain being kind of, I liken it to an assembly line. And you want that assembly line to run without exception, kind of from beginning to end. And that's really what a supply chain is. And it's all about, as we've talked, managing the data and information. The better you do that, the less exceptions you have. This industry tends to focus very heavily on what is my freight rate? How much is my container for this? How much is my entry? And those are important aspects of it, but they pale in comparison to inventory carrying costs, cycle time, your cash to cash cycle. That's why if you can elevate these discussions to the CFO, the CEO, I think you'll get a much different discussion point and then value proposition for them that they can leverage for a business. And, the things that Tim does and others is using their supply chain for competitive advantage.
Well, I love that. And I will say, even as a minor example, but here's something that, when we're talking about trying to cut costs, is to your point, when you're looking at things holistically, here's even from a standpoint, let's say that you're running a container, it's on ocean, it comes in, it clears at the port, then it moves to rail, it comes into then your destination railway station there. And the railway yard will give you usually one free day. Well, if it arrives, let's say on a Friday, all right, so then you've got to sit there and go, can you take a container for delivery on a Saturday or, late Friday night or something? If you can plan out those kinds of things. Otherwise, guess what? It comes in on a Friday. Well, guess what? Then you're going to get charged Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, potentially, 2 or 3 days extra demurrage charges in all that scenario. So it's like, that's one way where you can work smarter, not harder, by looking at the timing on the scenario. I mean, that's just a small thing, but when we're looking at it holistically, there we go. Tom, how about from your perspective, my friend?
Well, from my perspective, I'm going to go back to the same thing we've been talking about. Data is king. Data is really the future of trade. And I think that when we start talking about data, we need to drill down and realize that of all the priority issues for the different government regulatory agencies, all the priority issues for companies that are involved in international trade, it all comes back to data. But it also comes back to more data about the product's complete life cycle. I like to think about it from, I wrote a blog post I called From Dirt to Shirt. And so with issues like forced labor or some of the environmental issues, understanding the data around your products, going all the way back to the raw materials and then going all the way forward to the final end of life of the product, that's really what becomes key for governments that are regulating, but also for companies. And companies need that information, not only for the regulatory compliance, but as Bernie was saying, there's so many other decisions that can be made much more easily by companies that have access to and have control of all of that data on how their products are made and how their products are moved to market and how their products are moved through the life cycle of the product.
Tom, I was going to make a comment. The first 3 weeks of the year for our episodes for the podcast, and I know we never script this. We never really we barely mention what we're going to talk about on all our podcasts. This being the same case here, but it's funny how you and the first 3 episodes of our season were all about data. I mean, it's like we have former Commissioner Alan Burson. He was talking about data. We had Vinny Annunziato on the show, and they're talking about this really cool program that they're working on. And then we had, of course, Cindy and Amy Magnus talking about what is the most important thing for 2024. It's everybody almost hands down is data, data, data.
Well, and to that point, where I was going to go is that with the data, also the data files of these records and things, there's got to be a reference where you can start linking it. And I know it would be considered a bit old school, but these relational database files, relational tables, where you've got one where you can link to all these different tables. Now they're going into 3D distribution systems, and I'm talking data distribution. And I got to say, I have seen where a lot of data has been able to be stored on those 3D things, but I have seen a challenge in extracting out the accurate data. So I'm still back to, the relational tables are defined and done and used for a long time. But the point being is this, is to your point, is that looking at the different reports is being able to relate to the different tables so you can get transportation rates from one thing and then the duty and taxes or the entry from another, and then the sale or the accounting or what. There's an audit trail where I love that. I'm going to look at your blog post on that, From Dirt to Shirt. I love that title, but it's one of those things where people are trying to track the whole thing. And so all said and done, not only are we talking about the data, but it's like, what are you storing? And there's a way to link it up to different things. And that's where that collaborative effort of multiple departments, if you will, in a company need to come together. And that's something that sounds like you guys help facilitate.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think that the transportation logistics industry is a very old industry. And I think that maybe in some ways the transportation and logistics industry is somewhat to blame for the lack of visibility in data, right? Because as a freight forwarder, we're concerned about moving a container. As a customs broker, we're concerned about moving what's in the container at the HTS level. But a company is concerned about what every product in the container is, where it comes from, where it goes to. And one of the things that as an industry, we haven't done a good job historically is that keeping that data and maintaining it. And you mentioned the relational databases. Bernie was talking a little bit earlier about, things with Drawback, where we need to know not just the HTS number of all the products that were imported and exported, but we need to know the relationship between the HTS number and the part numbers and the SKU numbers for the parts that are in that container, so that we can do things like make a drawback claim or prove to the government that we don't have forced labor that was used to make that product. And without that visibility, without those connections between all of the data, it's much more difficult for us to do that.
Well, and here's the one thing that people get so wrapped up when they're generating, let's say, shipment paperwork, if you will, to move the shipment. And in today's world, really, there's a lot of that you don't necessarily need the hard copy paper. You need the data, and you need to be able to take it and give whoever's working at it the ability to sort that data electronically so they can put it in the right format, if you will, to efficiently deal with it. And I'll give you a great example. People will sit there and some of the computer companies were probably the worst at this. Computer companies, I'm talking the Dells. Remember the old Compacts, who's the Gateway? Was it the cows ship boxes and all? Anyway, they would go through and look at all that and they would say, okay, do you have a consolidated invoice, because of they're shipping multiple laptops or computers and stuff. Oh yeah, we've got it consolidated. Well, and I would look at it, and one particular client that I had, literally when they printed it out, they had 7,500 orders in this particular shipment, if you will. And the commercial invoice was 10,000 pages. I said, how the hell did you consolidate it? Oh, we consolidated it at the customer order level. And I said, that's not a consolidation. That's a customer order listing. Let's take all the laptops that are part number 1, 2, 3 and put them together. And then it's like country. So, sort it by country of origin, by, harmonized tariff number preferably, and then the quantity and all that, or, by country of origin and the part number, and then, give you a breakdown. You can do it. And when I got the IT people together to talk about that 10,000 page commercial invoice dropped down to 3 pages. All right. Well, what's that do? Well, even in transporting the data from like the backup and all that from the broker back to the customer, I mean, that their accounting people going 10,000 pages, this blowing is like, well, it's your own purchasing or your own transportation people that are doing it. And so finally we got people together. So there's my point is, there's efficiencies that can be gained, and then you analyze the data, and then there's strategic efficiencies that can be gained. So the managing the data is essential. So that's the paramount thing that seems to be the focus that people need to be working on. Well, folks, I got to say, this has been a good discussion as always. I appreciate you guys on here, and Lalo and I have just Flexport is one of those companies we both admire, and you guys seem to be still kicking it. So it's looking forward to getting together again at another trade association so we can shake hands and have a beer or something. Looking forward to the next go round.
Sounds great. I look forward to it too.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to turn it back over to you. We hope this has been an informative discussion. We will definitely have the Flexport contact folks, on our show notes and whatnot, but also just in general, I mean, this isn't an ad for Flexport, although it kind of sounds that way. It's one of those, it's just a case where talking out there, what do you need to be looking at? Managing your data. If you're struggling with that, get experts out there. Are you leaving money on the table? Look at your duty drawback capabilities. Look at your changing of sourcing and whatever. Get experts involved. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. And, our fine folks from Flexport, and there's other companies that we've highlighted and all that are very well worth checking out. So, Lalo, with that, any last words from you, sir?
Nope. Just thank you to our guests, and it was a good conversation. Thank you so much.
Folks, one last thing. If you would please reach out, like us, subscribe to us especially. We need to ask for your help on that. We are hitting some new major milestones, and we really need your help to continue moving up the chain. So with that, y'all have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situation. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.